What is up, Iwu crew? As more cold cases continue to be solved at a rapid pace over the last few years, long-hidden truths are brought to the light, and families left in the dark for decades finally receive some closure. Today, we have the stories of 3 cold cases that have already been solved in 2021. Let's get into it. Today's first case began back in 1988, waiting a long 32 years to meet a conclusion, though many attached to the case still feel that the ending is unsatisfactory. On October 9, 1988, 30-year-old Gayle Barrus disappeared from Battle Creek, Michigan, leaving behind her 3 children, who she was raising as a single mother. She was last seen at Speed's coffee shop, where she was witnessed in a confrontation with 2 unidentified men, although she appeared only to be arguing with one of the men. This was the final time she was ever seen alive. Gayle's son James, who had been only 13 when his mother was murdered, later recalled that he had spent the day that she vanished waiting and waiting for her return, hoping that she would just come back, but she never did. After 16 days of searching, Gayle's body was finally found by hunters on October 25th near River Road in Emmett Township. After an autopsy, it was discovered that she had died from multiple stab wounds, and there was evidence that she had been assaulted. The DNA of her attacker was recovered from her clothing, but because of the rudimentary DNA analysis technology at the time, it couldn't be utilized to find her killer. The police investigated 2 friends, and though they considered both men to be persons of interest, one became their prime suspect, a man by the name of Roger Allen Plato. Investigators felt sure that Plato was involved in some way with Gayle's death, as they believed that he had been the man she was seen arguing with. However, the DNA testing, known to be inaccurate and unreliable at the time, had come back with the conclusion that Plato couldn't have been her killer. And even when his DNA was tested again, the results stated that it was inconclusive. The other man that the police had suspected, Richard Compton, had also been eliminated from the case by DNA evidence. With these 2 leads ended, Gayle's case went cold. It wasn't until years later, in 2020, when Gayle's son James approached the police, that her case was reopened, this time approached with new DNA technology. James had spent the years since 2013 collecting his own research on her death, including police records. Even after 3 decades, James never lost the hope that his mother's killer would be found. At first, the Battle Creek Homicide Unit met an immediate roadblock. The investigators on the case decided to reevaluate both of the original suspects in Gayle's murder, Compton and Plato. But Compton had died at age 59 in 2009. In March of 2020, Compton's body was exhumed, and his DNA was once again ruled to not be involved in the case. Then, in June, the police tested the sample they had for Plato's DNA, and it was also found not to match the DNA from Gayle's murderer. At first, it seemed like the case was once again cold. However, there was an issue. The DNA the police were using for Plato had been collected from a jacket that they knew belonged to him, but it had actually been a mixture of 3 different people's DNA, making the sample for Plato not strong enough to be conclusive. It seemed that the next logical conclusion was that a proper DNA sample needed to be taken from Plato. However, there was once again another problem. He had also died. Shockingly, at the time of Gayle's murder, Plato had been a suspect in another assault case, and possibly several others. He had actually died only 2 days before Gayle's body was even found. Police had closed in on him in relation to the other case, and Plato fled the scene. Plato then fought back against the police, and the authorities opened fire in their efforts to capture him, but ended up killing him on the spot. His body was later cremated. Though the police wouldn't be able to get a DNA sample from Plato's cremated body, it was later discovered that during his autopsy, a sample of his blood had been taken and stored. With the latest DNA technology, Plato's DNA was once again tested, and this time, it was found to be a match for Gayle's killer. As the suspect has already died, the police won't be filing any charges, but the investigation is finally closed. James commented that even though he's waited years, hoping for this conclusion in his mother's case, there still isn't any real closure after all of the hurt he and his siblings suffered after losing her. Even so, he is able to look at the situation with a bit of a silver lining. He has shared, "Right now, I'm just still trying to catch my breath and exhale at the same time." Later adding, "I think if somebody was around today, now we've got to endure a trial, which then creates a lot of other issues, and then we potentially don't get a conviction, and then what? Even with a DNA match, because there's so much time has elapsed, eyewitnesses have either passed away or they can't be relied upon for their statements 32 years later. So I'm kind of glad it wound up the way it is." Our next case took place in 2008. In Lansing, Michigan, 34-year-old Krista Robin Lueth was a college student studying for her second bachelor's degree in horticulture after earning a previous degree in botany. Known to be dedicated and studious, she had plans to complete a graduate program at Cornell University. On November 11, 2008, following that day's classes, Krista had arrived at the house she rented around 5 p.m. There she talked to her close friend who lived in the rooms above her. She told him that she was worried about being able to make her rent because she had just broken up with her boyfriend and asked him to move out. In order to pay for the rent without him, she was going to have to sell her truck and start to work part-time as a waitress. Krista was due to leave again for a class at 6:30 at a nearby greenhouse, but she never showed up. Krista's friends became worried about her when none of them could get a hold of her. When they called authorities, a search of her house was conducted, and her cat, Moet, was found alone, locked inside. The lights were left on, with a pan filled with food waiting on the stove, but there was no trace of Krista. It seemed as if she had left and expected to come back, but never did. Her friend reported that nothing seemed wrong with her when they spoke, and that he hadn't heard anything suspicious coming from her part of the house. The investigators' attention immediately turned to Krista's ex-boyfriend, Brad Cornea. They had met in early 2008 and began dating. It wasn't long before Cornea moved in, but the couple broke up months later. Following the breakup, Krista had complained to her father that Cornea wouldn't leave her alone and kept calling her, even when she told him to stop. In fact, it had been Cornea who was the last person to call Krista before she disappeared, and pings from his cell phone showed that he had been near her home that night. Not only did Cornea appear to have taken the couple's breakup badly, but he also had an extensive criminal record. At only 18, Cornea broke into an apartment and assaulted a woman, resulting in him being sentenced to serve 10 to 15 years in prison in 1986. He was released in 2000, but almost immediately found himself in trouble again. He assaulted one of his female relatives and was once again in prison, this time for 8 years. Cornea received parole in 2007, just before he met Krista. A sheriff's deputy later recalled that he had seen Cornea on the US 127 on the day that Krista went missing and helped him as his truck had broken down there. A search of the area, only 8 miles from Krista's house, revealed that her driver's license, debit card, and her broken cell phone had been left by the side of the road, resulting in her disappearance being categorized as a homicide in 2009. In 2014, Cornelia was declared to be the prime suspect in Krista's presumed murder, as it was believed that he had picked her up from her home and drove to a remote area where an argument ensued, and he likely killed her. But despite this theory, there wasn't enough evidence to charge him. Though police were sure that Cornelia was involved, Krista's disappearance and probable death was declared a cold case. Her body was never found. However, in January 2021, the longtime suspect Cornelia was charged with the presumed murder of Krista. Though it isn't clear what exactly led detectives to finally charge the now 53-year-old Cornelia, more details will likely be released when the case goes to trial. He was already in prison and serving a sentence of 17 to 40 years. He had shown a 15-year-old girl an inappropriate photo of himself, as well as a video on his cell phone. Because of this, he was charged with the trafficking of a minor and using a computer to commit a crime. He is now facing an additional murder charge. Even though Cornelia has been charged with trafficking, he remains adamant that the photos used in his trial don't even exist. He also claims that he isn't guilty of Krista's disappearance or death, and that he is being unfairly targeted by authorities. The prosecution of Cornelia's 2017 sentencing said that Cornelia had, quote, almost no rehabilitative potential. Many of Krista's loved ones and friends have expressed relief at finally having some closure with her case, and are happy to see that the man that they believe to be guilty is being held accountable for the crime. The last case we have for you today is a chilling story filled with mystery. On October 9, 1994, Catherine Gennaro, a 20-year-old mother of a 2.5-year-old child, went out to party with some of her friends at the bars in downtown Barrie, Ontario, Canada. Catherine had left home at only 16 to move in with her then boyfriend, and the couple had a child together when she was 17. But almost a year prior, they had broken up, and Catherine was living alone with her daughter, Dawn Nelson. On the weekend of October 9th, her daughter was spending time with her grandparents, freeing Catherine to go out and see her friends. What happened to her remained a mystery for almost 3 decades. 24 hours after going out, she was found dead by her friends in the basement of her apartment after being stabbed multiple times. Investigators uncovered that while she was at the bar, she had invited some of the people that she met to come back to her apartment to continue the fun night. It was this choice that is believed to have led to her untimely death. One of the clues the killer left behind, or rather took with them, was Catherine's home telephone. The phone had been completely ripped off the wall of her apartment and wasn't found anywhere nearby. This lead appeared significant, as investigators believed that the phone had been taken because Catherine had saved her killer's number on the phone's memory system. 1 month later, the phone was found submerged in a nearby creek, but intact. Though the memory system hadn't been damaged, it didn't reveal as much as police had hoped. After more investigation, including hundreds of witness statements, police started to put together a story about Catherine's life, one that helped to explain how the young woman had come to be murdered. They believed that she had become involved in the city's drug trade, and that she had been killed as part of a robbery. While Catherine's case was open, the police had identified 6 suspects who they believed were involved or had knowledge about the crime. But even with 6 people in mind, they never charged anyone with Catherine's death. After 5 years investigating, Catherine's case was handed over to the OPP Identification Bureau in the hopes that they would be able to uncover more about the crime. But still no real leads were found. For over a decade, her case went cold. Then in 2014, Detective Rob Gravel made a public announcement saying that he knew the identity of Catherine's murderer and that the police were keeping a close eye on one person of interest. With the help of a DNA analysis, the 6 suspects were narrowed down to 2. Yet, while the anxious public waited for the saga to be brought to an end, no arrest was ever made. In the years to follow, Catherine's daughter, Dawn, spoke publicly about the loss of her mother at such a young age. She even recalled a moment when she was 6 years old, watching TV, and had inadvertently witnessed a reenactment of her mother's death. While stumbling across a Crime Stoppers reenactment, young Dawn watched a woman being stabbed in her apartment. She shared that, moments later, a picture of the woman holding her child was put on the screen, and I realized at that moment that that was my mother. I knew because this is the same picture that was in my living room to this day. I have never been able to get rid of the hurt and confusion that flooded my mind that night. In 2020, new information about Catherine's death finally came to light. As with many cold cases, the investigators were waiting for that one piece of evidence that would finally bring justice to the case, which is exactly what happened. On January 13, 2021, 58-year-old Robert Bruce McQueen, commonly known by his alias Bruce Ellis, was arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of Catherine. I think he was surprised, shared a Barrie Police Services spokesperson. As you can appreciate, 26 years had passed. That's a lot of looking over your shoulder, wondering if today is the day. Well, yesterday was the day. Currently, it is unclear if the suspect Detective Gravel referred to in 2014 is McQueen, but it is believed that Catherine knew McQueen before she died, though the police haven't revealed too many details at this time, nor the exact piece of evidence that led them to charge McQueen. There is a chance that DNA evidence may have played a role, but there had also been over 350 witnesses interviewed during the investigation, and their statements could have been just as important. More details will be revealed when the murder case goes to trial. After 26 years, Catherine's daughter can finally rest easy. She only wishes that her grandparents were still alive to see this hard-fought conclusion. Barrie Police Chief Kimberly Greenwood has since asserted, "The fact that today we can hold someone accountable for the violent death of Catherine Gennaro should serve as proof that no homicide case is ever closed until an arrest is made." As 2021 progresses, we can only hope to see that even more cold cases are finally solved. And as we are only a few months in at the time of this video, it seems likely that this year may set a new record for justice being brought to many cold cases.